I'm Susan Smith, and I'm a white, female, 52-year-old convert to Islam, one of the country's smallest minorities, mother of two teenage girls, former Islamic school principal, former United Nations employee, current University of Kentucky Castle student, American citizen, and aspiring global citizen. According to Alfred Adler, founder of the School of Individual Psychology and the first to emphasize the community and social elements in the growth and development process of an individual, my happiness, well-being, and sense of worth derive from, in concentric circles of importance, myself, my mother, my father, my other relatives, my community, my nation, and that can be a hyphenated identity like English, German, Native American, Muslim American, and the world at large. How I feel about myself is greatly dependent on how I connect with humanity and extend and expand my social footprint in feelings, thoughts, and actions. So let's start with the first two spheres of my influence, my mom and dad. Both were born in the late 1920s. Both were raised without dads, something socially and financially challenging, especially in those days. And I think they instilled in me that it's not important to conform to societal expectations. We need to value and be true to ourselves. Both my mom and dad have passed away. And if I think about the big takeaways and impact they had on my life, I think of two conversations. My mom was murdered by a stalker at the age of 57. And in the years before she died, she did a lot of soul searching and truth seeking and became a follower of New Age religion. She taught me about psychic phenomenon, astral projection, reincarnation, world peace, and universal love. She said just before she died, "If I die, be happy for me. I've gone to a higher plane of existence." I learned from her to seek nearness to God and to look beyond the prevalent religion of our culture. Also, in losing my own source of unconditional love, I turned to God even more deeply. The most memorable conversation I had with my dad, I think, was when I was about 10 years old. And he said to me one day, "You could travel the world, but you're not smart enough." And I took that to heart. Meanwhile, my grandmother, who was born in 1898 and died in 1999, just 3 months short of 3 centuries, by the 1920s, prior to the invention of the airplane, she had traveled to China, Singapore, Egypt, San Francisco, Chicago, and New York. And not because she was rich, but because she was resourceful. She was a nanny for rich people. Back to Alfred Adler's paradigm of individual and social psychology, my community was a waspy New England town in Connecticut settled in 1747 with a population of 1,600 whites. There was one black family, and the father drove the school bus, and one Jewish family, and they ran the local hardware store. Later, when a single black female artist moved into town from New York City, my mom became her best friend. And I remember thinking that no one knows what black people are like until they sit at the kitchen table and eat and play board games with them. I don't have a picture of my mom and her best friend, but this photo of Marilyn Monroe and Ella Fitzgerald captures the essence of their friendship. Meanwhile, my dad worked as a caretaker on a multi-millionaire's estate, and we had the run of the place with free access to the lake, boats, tennis, skidoos, squash courts, gardens, the sap house. And one day he said to me, "Susie, we don't have to own any of this. Just use it and enjoy it. It's all the same." And it struck me that the wealth of each day is made up more so by experiences than material ownership. Life is for the taking. And I decided when I went away to college that I wanted to be a journalist. And I studied first at the University of Connecticut, where I did a junior year abroad at London University. And after taking a wonderful class with my favorite professor on the Arab-Israeli conflict, decided to do a senior semester abroad at Tel Aviv University. Inspired by my wonderful professor, I truly believed that if peace could be achieved in the Middle East, it could serve as a model for the rest of the world. At Tel Aviv University, overseas students were housed with the Palestinians in the oldest, most run-down dorms. On my second day, there was a knock on the door. A Palestinian girl shyly held out to me a big plate of food with a big smile. And I soon found myself hanging out with the Palestinians and would spend my weekends with them in the old city of Jerusalem. One day, my friend Isa, which is Arabic for Jesus, was beat up by Israeli soldiers in front of me and my friend because he was in the company of two American girls. "What are you doing with them?" the soldiers kept asking. "What are you doing with them?" 6 months later, I converted to Islam. In my heart, I knew that the Prophet Muhammad was a true messenger of God, who continued the teachings of Abraham, Moses, and Jesus. I found it convincing that in the Middle East, most of the people are Muslim. And 18 months later, I was at the American University in Cairo. The focus of my research, why the Palestine Liberation Organization is not a terrorist organization, citing Article 51 of the United Nations Charter, which provides for the right of countries, in this case the illegally occupied West Bank, Gaza Strip, and East Jerusalem, according to UN Security Council Resolutions 242 and 338, to engage in self-defense against an armed attack. I truly believe that if there could be justice, there could be peace. While at the American University in Cairo, I would frequently travel to visit my friends in Palestine and Israel. I visited refugee camps in the Gaza Strip and West Bank, and a children's hospital where I met kids that were injured, paralyzed, and blinded by Israeli tanks and bullets. In Cairo, I met and fell in love with a handsome Palestinian with black eyes and black hair, who typically wore a black leather jacket, black ankle boots, and the traditional black and white checkered scarf symbolic of the Palestinian Revolution. We married in Jordan, and my dad and grandmother, my mom had already passed away, came for the wedding. We went to Iraq for our honeymoon. Those were heady days, and in retrospect, I married with my heart and not my head. So going back to Alfred Adler, my community had become multinational and multi-religious and expanded from predominantly Christian to include Jews and Muslims. The next step was to extend my feelings of community to the rest of the world. Upon returning to the States from the American University in Cairo, my favorite professor introduced me to the ambassador of Lebanon to the United Nations. For 4 years, I worked as his assistant and speechwriter and would accompany him to the General Assembly and Security Council. When he retired, I worked at the UN Department of Public Information as an information officer, and later as a voter registration officer for the UN peacekeeping mission in the Western Sahara. In Africa, I was struck by the poverty and destitution. After I came back, we had 2 children, 2 little girls, one after the other. We moved to upstate New York, bought a house in the country, and I took care of the babies while he tried to make ends meet. Everyone said we were a beautiful family, but that was on the outside. My husband became verbally, physically, and psychologically abusive. I fled with the girls to a safe home shelter, and we got divorced. As a single mom with my background, I was unable to get a decent job, so I went back to school to do my master's in education at Long Island University's West Point campus. As time passed, and with most of my family passed away, I became more and more reliant on God to get me through. I became more practicing in my religion, started to wear the hijab, and pray 5 times a day. I also studied Islam and took classes. I moved back to New York City and started to work in Islamic schools, where my children also attended, so that I could be with them 24/7. There is a shortage of Islamic school principals in the United States, and so in the years that followed, we moved to Yonkers, New York, and Sunrise, Florida, and I was offered successively better salaries and benefits. In each of these places, I would engage in interfaith dialogues and discussion groups pertaining to peace in the Middle East. Then I was recruited to start up a new Islamic high school near Dearborn, Michigan, where my daughters and I moved. When the school closed with the purchase of the property falling through, I took the opportunity to go back to school and enrolled in the University of Kentucky's Castle program. I had no idea how much I had become irrelevant as an instructional leader until I took my first 2 classes last semester. And then I realized until I am able to transition a school into a 21st century skills and technology suffused learning environment, I'm not ready to go back to being a school principal. And then, in a moment of epiphany, I realized that the internet is a game changer. And now back to the individual and social psychology paradigm of Alfred Adler and the view that the world is the last extension of the self. I started to think about Facebook and social media as the unifying and empowering force behind the Arab Spring revolutions calling for democracy all over the Middle East, and how through a united voice, Egypt, for example, was able to bring down a dictator and hold democratic elections, albeit with growing pains. And then I started to think about the power and potential for all of us as educators to galvanize, to unite with a global curriculum that teaches world peace. And that all of us everywhere, irrespective of race, religion, nationality, gender, or any other demographic, have the same aspirations and the same responsibilities, the same basic human rights as enshrined in the Universal Declaration of Human Rights proclaimed unanimously by the UN General Assembly back in 1948. Today, my goal is to design a universal high school, middle school, and elementary school curriculum aligned with active implementation of the United Nations Millennium Development Goals, complete with a practical variety of country and region-specific lesson plans, fostering cooperation and collaboration between schools and classrooms across the globe. So, what do we have to do, and what are the 8 Millennium Development Goals? Eradicate extreme hunger and poverty. Achieve universal primary education. Promote gender equality and empowering women. Reduce child mortality rates. Improve maternal health. Combat HIV, AIDS, malaria, and other diseases. Ensure environmental sustainability. And develop a global partnership for development. I want to share this curriculum with the Islamic Schools League of America so that the Muslim schools can collaborate in teaching for world peace at home and abroad and have a positive impact. I'm hoping that Jewish, Christian, independent, and public schools will also adopt the curriculum. Ideally, the UN will incorporate it into its Cyber School Bus initiative, post it on its website, and make it available to the rest of the world. So this is where I am today as a student, educator, and community member, an aspiring global citizen who has a passion to take schools, classrooms, and students on journeys to meet and help each other feel good and do good works all over the globe. I am hoping that the design and implementation of this technology-suffused curriculum can bring about true reform in the way we as educators and students see each other, while underscoring our responsibility to care for each other, and that we won't stop until peace and prosperity prevail.